All right, so that is the leadership there of the ANC in Gauteng briefing the media after the postponement of the Gauteng, the announcement of the province's executive council. Premier Panyaza Lesufi had hoped that he was going to be able to do this tonight, but it's not second time lucky for him, as he now has to pause this particular announcement. And you've listened there, they're putting the blame squarely on the Democratic Alliance. The country's economic hub is essentially without a proper government. We only have a premier. So what happens now? They talk about these deadlocks with the Democratic Alliance, and they say that they've had several of these particular deadlocks, but it doesn't look like they are now finding each other. But when you listen to the leadership, they say that they're ready, the premier is ready to then be able to make this announcement. But they still need to try and find, common ground with the Democratic Alliance. Will they? Let's now bring in political analysts for reaction now and speak to Professor John Molepo as well as Professor Dirk, Kotze, who are both joining us now. Let me start with you, Professor Kotze. You've heard a lot from the ANC's leadership in the province of Gauteng. They're putting the blame squarely on the Democratic Alliance. Your reaction?
Yeah, I must say this whole event surprises me quite a lot. It's not very much contributing to a negotiation approach. The situation between the national government of national unity and Gauteng is different. And I think what they try to do is follow very similar lines in terms of the negotiation process. And because the ANC in Gauteng is much weaker than the ANC nationally, it is around about 34.8% versus the 40% at national level. And the DA is much stronger in Gauteng than nationally at 27%. So it's only a difference of 7% between the two parties, while nationally there's a 20% difference between the parties. And what I'm hearing here is not a realization of that they are so close to each other. And it is as it looks like the ANC wants to dictate this process. And therefore, I think this is part of the complication. The other issue which is not being mentioned is that the seats available for this negotiation are much less than at the national level. It's only 10 seats in the Executive Council compared to the 30 national ministers and 45 deputy ministers. So Professor, it means while there are 7 parties here that are, if they follow the same pattern as the government of national unity, it means that there are 7 parties in Gauteng that might be involved and will be looking for seats. To divide 10 seats amongst 7 parties is a very tricky business. And I think this is part of where the situation is getting complicated.
Yeah, Professor, Professor Molepo, let me bring you in on that point. Your take?
Well, I think what is critical is that the fact that the ANC in Gauteng obviously did not win outright a majority. They depend on other parties to form what you call the GNU or the provincial GNU in terms of making the cabinet. So I think it's important for them to really negotiate with all these political parties to find each other. But the way they are saying it, it seems that they've excluded the DA in this particular arrangement. And if they've excluded the DA, what does it mean? Does it mean that they're going to work with the EFF or the MK? Because the nationally, the leadership of the ANC has been very difficult to work with the particularly the MK and also the EFF. So I'm trying to understand whether the ANC in Gauteng is willing to work with these other political parties. But also, I think what is critical is that I thought that the national will obviously dictate to what is happening in Gauteng, because like Prof indicated that the margins are too little. And I think the two, DA and ANC, if they work together, obviously they can form what you call the government. So that's why I think even if the DA will demand more, it's reasonable based on what they've achieved. But if ANC is really willing to work with the other political parties, they can still announce and work with other political parties. But also in terms of governance issues, I think academics should ponder on this particular issue that the GNU has presented a case wherein the premiers or the president do not have the that particular right to appoint anyone now because of these particular negotiations.
So let me pause both of you for a second and bring in the DA's Gauteng leader, Solim Simanga, and try to understand from him. I do understand he's not with us on the line now, but just to try and understand, because you listen to the ANC leadership in Gauteng, they talk about the fact that the DA, they've concluded with other parties, that's what they say, but the DA is behaving like a spoiled brat. That's what they're saying, and also saying that they're not going to allow anyone to bully them. But really, Mum, on whether or not it is true, as some of the reporters were asking, if they've offered them the 2 seats, as if they've offered them the 2 positions, as they've said, and you look at some of, the reports, they're suggesting that the DA is saying that they're going to be boycotting this particular new administration. So before then we bring in Solim Simanga, because we don't have him on the line yet, Prof, let me come back to you, Professor Kotze, because what does this mean then when you look at the arrangement nationally? Because we had the announcement yesterday, but when you then look at where we are now in the economic hub, is everything stable even at national level?
Yes, I think it's not going to affect the national level now. I think what I'm expecting is that either the Premier and the provincial leader of the DA, Solim Simanga, will come together and similar to what President Ramaphosa and John Steenhuisen did, the leader of the DA, take over from these negotiating teams at some level if they cannot make progress anymore. If that doesn't work, then it will actually go higher to President Ramaphosa and John Steenhuisen. The two main principals will ultimately, I expect actually that they will become involved in this situation. If the provincial, because at this stage it is the 2 negotiating teams that are at odds with each other. And in terms of negotiation processes or protocols, if that becomes the situation, then they elevate it to the higher level. And in this case, it will first be at the level of the provincial leaders. And if they cannot reach a conclusion, then it will be the national leaders. So it's not yet that there is an absolute deadlock or stalemate. There are still some options open in order to resolve that. And I think that is where it, in the end, will actually be resolved.
Yeah. Professor Molepo, I mean, you listen to some, the leaders in Gauteng of the ANC. They say that, yes, they will try to speak to the Democratic Alliance, but they then have this caveat of saying that they can, work with other parties. They can continue with, the announcement. And then you listen to Professor Kotze, who says that, this might now be resolved at a national level. Are they really ready, if the Democratic Alliance is not on the table, to be able to make this announcement?
Well, I think the ANC, if they were ready, they were supposed to announce. If they were ready, like they indicated, if DA was not a factor, they were supposed to have announced. But because of DA is a factor in this particular instance, they had to stop the pronouncement. Therefore, it simply tells you an agreement with what Prof is saying, that this thing will escalate. If these provincial leaders are unable to meet together to find each other, I think this will automatically escalate to national leadership to negotiate on behalf of the province. Because remember, Gauteng is a very complex province, economic hub of the country. Each and every political party will want to have a hand on this particular province. Therefore, if these provincial leaders are failing to reach each other, therefore, I think the national will have to intervene. And I think we're seeing the similar cases, like for an example, what happened in national, wherein the DA were saying they were pulling out, coming back, writing letters, and similarly, this thing is happening in Gauteng. So I think sooner enough, the leadership intervene, we are likely to see the provincial cabinet being announced.
Before I come back to you, Professor Kotze, let me stay with what you're saying then, Prof. Molepo, because when you listen to this evening, we were speaking to the DS Tony Leon, for example. He was at that negotiating table, and he speaks about the fact that in terms of proportionality, they did not see this one coming. Yes, it's the prerogative of the president, but the expansion of the cabinet is something they did not see coming. And then he says that they were trying then, the ANC seems to have been trying through, maybe President Cyril Ramaphosa was trying to manage some of the internal dynamics there. But he says that in terms of proportionality, for them it's 18%. And for the ANC, he's putting it at 55%. So in light of that, how difficult can these conversations be, given the fact that they're seemingly not happy with what has transpired at national?
Well, I think it's important for each and every political leader to obviously deal with these particular dynamics. For an example, if you were to look into national, I think also Ramaphosa was trying to balance the question of internal strife that can arise from the ANC. People can rebel from within the ANC. Look, why do you still bring Blade and also Gwede? You know, if you deal with Gwede, you are likely to have a problem with labor unions, and also you are likely to get, because of the strong voice of Gwede in the NEC and in the ANC. So I think also even Panyaza must look into those particular aspects. The internal strife also has a very factor in terms of deciding your cabinet. So I think also we are likely to see the same thing happen in Gauteng, whether Bulewamaile still has to come back, whether Tasneem and many other important political figures in the province. Because of once you take them away from your cabinet, you are likely to drive a ship that other servants can be able to destroy that particular ship. So it's important that you manage those particular dynamics.
So I suppose then when you look at this particular conversation, Professor Kotze, it's then possibly likely to be difficult listening to what Professor Molepo is saying, because if now these particular tensions are playing out behind closed doors, not only where the Premier is concerned, but within the ANC in and itself, it is in fact a difficult conversation that they're going to have, and particularly with this very small margin that we are now hearing about. But before we continue with this conversation, let me in fact welcome our SABC3 viewers, because as you know that at this time we are of course welcoming our S3 viewers, and this of course good evening to you and welcome to the four of you. We just heard from the Gauteng leadership of the ANC that the Executive Council announcement has been postponed. Tonight we were expecting that Gauteng will possibly have its own, executive council that would be made up of those MECs. But it seems like things are at a sticking point with the Democratic Alliance. Listening to some of what the Gauteng leadership had to say of the ANC is that for them, they believe that the disagreements with the Democratic Alliance are really what got them to this particular point. And they say that they've deadlocked. They're also signaling to some kind of what they claim is bullying by the Democratic Alliance. But they do say that for them tomorrow they will then be able to announce this particular executive council. Will they? That is, of course, the big question, because you listen to, some of what has been coming out from that particular briefing. The country's economic hub still without this particular proper government, and it's critical when you look at the work that then the Premier has to carry out, because he can't do it alone. So certainly these particular conversations need to be had, but the ANC is saying that they are going to then try again to speak to the Democratic Alliance in order to be able to be on the same page. We are still in conversation with political analyst Professor John Molepo, as well as Professor Dirk Kotze, who are with us and still talking to them. So, Prof. Kotze, I was coming to you just before we had to welcome our SABC3 viewers. Let's talk about how difficult then these talks are likely to be, because if you are now managing internal dynamics, you are not only managing different political parties, but you also possibly may have turmoil from within.
Yeah, I think we must not complicate the situation. The situation as it is that the ANC and the DA must work together. They constitute 62% of the total votes in Gauteng. If the DA is not part of it, the ANC can only form a minority government. So that's the political reality, except if they go to the EFF and MK party. And it's clear at the moment it's not an option for them. Secondly, this is not happening in isolation. Last night was the announcement of the national government of unity. And at the same time, there is KwaZulu-Natal. And we must not underestimate the importance of KwaZulu-Natal behind the scenes. Because if there's problems with the DA, then the KwaZulu-Natal arrangement is going to also collapse. And that will mean that the MK and the EFF will come to power, most possibly with the NFP then. That is what the ANC wants to avoid at all costs. So it's not going to be very helpful to concentrate on Gauteng. What I'm trying to argue is that though we see now the visuals today of Gauteng claiming they take the decisions, that is not the reality. The final decisions are taken at the national level, and all of these dynamics will be taken into account. And the decision is imminent. It's going to happen very soon.
Prof, I'm going to come to that issue of the decision in just a moment, but let me stay with something you said, because the developments in KwaZulu-Natal have also been somewhat interesting. When you look at the fact that you have an NFP party through its leader, Ivan Barnes, in the Zululand district, for example, where he, was hoping to be mayor, but then an IFP candidate was elected unanimously. They voiced their, dissatisfaction with this, with the IFP saying that they're going to then be trying to find common ground there. Is it not shaky even on that aspect as well, not only from the Democratic Alliance front, if they don't find themselves, on the same page with the NFP?
Yes, the NFP is the kingmaker in KwaZulu-Natal, and they will have to be protected at all costs by the ANC and by the IFP, because if they provide the majority for the coalition there, and if they withdraw, if it goes to the MK and EF, then it will be a complete change of the provincial government. So I expect that all the attention will be given to them, especially by the ANC, in order to make it ensure that they are not going to switch sides to MK and the EFF. And that is why this situation is so finely balanced, because the ANC wants to avoid at all costs that MK gets into a government position anyway. So whether it is in KwaZulu-Natal or in Gauteng, and that is, in a sense, the leverage that the DA has, because they know that is in the minds of the ANC, and that is why they can negotiate these things that we are talking about, or what they have presented to us tonight. But if it becomes really a crisis situation, that's why I'm absolutely sure then the leaders at national level will intervene and come.
So, Prof, can that be a reality, though, to try and keep the MK party out at all costs, given what is happening now?
Well, as I said, it is their objective. They are going to do it as best as possible to do.
But is it likely to be a reality? Yes, it's an objective. It's something they're trying to avoid. But given what is happening now, do you think they can avoid it?
Yes, they can.
Care to expand?
By reaching an agreement with the DA.
All right.
Gauteng specifically. So, in the case of the NFP, there are many means. The problem with the NFP is they don't have any seats in parliament. So they can't get national seats, for example, in the national government of unity, except if they use one of the two external seats that can be filled in the cabinet. But that will be a new ballgame in order to deal with that. So what they are doing with the NFP now is to try to accommodate them within KwaZulu-Natal. But if that is not going to work, I'm quite sure they are going to make some other arrangement in order to bring the NFP closer to the national government.
All right, Professor Kotze, as you say, it's going to be a fine line, but definitely a lot of negotiation, as you say, and even thinking about, you know, something that you're touching on, which is quite important, is around how national then begins to resolve this particular issue. It'll be interesting to then hear from the, you know, the ANC even in the Gauteng province, as you say, that they may claim that they do have the decision-making capabilities, but they may not. And it'll be interesting to even hear from the Democratic Alliance. We're trying to get Solim Simanga as well in order to be able to speak to him and to understand exactly what's going on. Thank you so much, Professor Kotze, for your time. That is Professor Dirk Kotze there. And a political analyst. We also had Professor John Molepo there, who was joining us for this particular conversation.